"I speak 10 languages," said the autistic son of the black cleaning lady. The CEO laughed, but was shocked by what happened next. Richard Caldwell's laughter echoed through the executive hallway of TechCorp Tower in Seattle, interrupting a board meeting that was deciding the future of billion-dollar contracts. He had gone out to get coffee when he heard that strangely monotone voice coming from the waiting room. "Excuse me." Richard turned, adjusting his $1,000 Hermes tie, looking at the boy sitting stiffly in a plastic chair. A black boy, about 13 years old, wearing headphones too big for his head, rocking slightly back and forth. "What did you say?" "I speak 10 languages," the boy repeated without making eye contact, his eyes fixed on an indeterminate point on the wall. "Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, German, French, Spanish, Italian, Japanese, Korean and English. I also understand basic Portuguese, but I'm not fluent." Richard laughed louder, almost spitting out his coffee. "Of course you do, kid." He looked around for responsible adults. "Where are your parents? Children can't stay here unsupervised." "My mom is cleaning the executive bathroom on the 12th floor, the boy replied, still not looking at Richard. "She always brings me when she has no one to leave me with. Thursdays are extra shift. It ends at 9 o'clock at night." That's when Richard noticed the woman in the blue cleaning uniform carrying a bucket and supplies, walking hurriedly down the hallway. She froze when she saw the CEO talking to her son. "Elijah," she called, her voice laden with barely concealed panic. "Baby, I told you to be quiet." She turned to Richard, automatically lowering her head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell. He won't bother you. The babysitter canceled at the last minute and..." "I'm not bothered, Ms. Williams. Angela Williams." She clutched the bucket to her chest like a shield. "I've worked here for 6 years. Night shift. Never had any complaints." Richard studied the woman for a moment. Approximately 35 years old, too thin, deep dark circles under her eyes that revealed nights without adequate sleep. Rough hands from spending hours immersed in cleaning chemicals. "Your son just told me he speaks 10 languages, Richard said, his tone clearly skeptical but slightly amused. Angela closed her eyes briefly, breathing heavily. Elijah has autism, sir. Sometimes he says things. Fixations. Languages are his current obsession. He watches videos on YouTube, he thinks." "It's not an obsession," Elijah interrupted, still not looking at anyone. "Obsession implies compulsive behavior with no functional purpose. I study languages because linguistic structures are logically consistent and predictable, unlike human social interactions, which are chaotic and contradictory." Richard blinked. The clinical precision of the boy's speech, the advanced vocabulary, the way he articulated complex concepts with that strangely monotone voice, it wasn't what he expected to hear from a janitor's son sitting in a corporate waiting room. "Elijah, baby, please," Angela pleaded, tears beginning to form. "Mr. Caldwell has important things to do. We can't." "Prove it," Richard said suddenly, crossing his arms. He didn't know why he was doing this. Maybe boredom from the endless meeting. Perhaps genuine curiosity. Perhaps the casual cruelty of a powerful man testing the absurd claims of a clearly different child. "If you really speak 10 languages, prove it." Angela stepped forward protectively. "Sir, please. He's just a child with..." Richard said in the basic Arabic he had learned on a business trip to Dubai. "Red apple. Red apple." "Snow White," Elijah replied immediately, correcting Richard's grammar without looking up. "Your Arabic accent is from the Gulf region, but with Anglophone interference. You probably learned it in a commercial, not academic, context." The hallway fell completely silent. Richard felt something strange in his stomach, not exactly anger, but discomfort at having his limitations pointed out by a child who was supposedly incapable of basic social function. He tried in Mandarin. "That's impossible," Elijah replied fluently, his tone maintaining the same monotony but his pronunciation perfect, with no detectable accent. "Not only possible but completely provable. Would you like me to continue in Mandarin, or would you prefer to test another language? Russian, perhaps? Or Korean?" Angela was crying silently now, her hands shaking as she held the bucket. 6 years of cleaning corporate offices had taught her that people like Richard Caldwell didn't like to be challenged, much less corrected. And definitely not by a 13-year-old autistic black boy whose mother cleaned their bathrooms. What? Richard asked, and for the first time in years, his voice carried not automatic arrogance, but genuine confusion. YouTube, language apps, the public library on Saturdays, Elijah recited as if listing recipe ingredients. I have hyperlexia. I taught myself to read at 2. Languages are systems of patterns. I'm very good with patterns. I'm not good with people. That's why my mom has to work extra night shifts to pay for behavioral therapy that insurance doesn't cover. The last sentence was delivered with the same lack of emotion as all the others, but the emotional impact hit Angela like a physical punch. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to stifle a sob. Richard looked between mother and son. A woman broken by the system, working double shifts to pay for treatment for an extraordinary child that the medical system considered too expensive to help. A boy whose mind processed 10 languages but struggled to understand why his mother was crying. And Richard Caldwell, CEO of a technology company valued at $12 billion, a man who made decisions affecting thousands of lives every day, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Shame. Because he had laughed. Discarded. Presumed impossible based on nothing more than appearances, the son of a cleaning lady, a child with special needs, a working-class black family that did not belong in the executive corridors where destinies were decided. Mr. Caldwell, Angela said, quickly wiping away her tears. I'll finish my work and make sure Elijah doesn't bother you anymore. Please don't report this. I need this job. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by Timothy Walsh, VP of Operations, leaving the meeting room. Richard, we need you. The negotiation with the Chinese delegation is... Timothy stopped when he saw the scene. What's going on here? Nothing, Richard said quickly. Just. This boy speaks 10 languages, he said, the words coming out before he could fully process them. He didn't know why he was doing this. Perhaps to validate what he had just witnessed. Perhaps to challenge his own assumptions. Fluent. Timothy looked at Elijah with the same skepticism Richard had shown minutes earlier. Of course he does. He turned to Angela. Are you part of the cleaning crew? Yes, sir. Then you should be cleaning, not allowing your son to disturb. Elijah interrupted, still staring at the wall. You are negotiating with the Chinese delegation. I heard it through the door. You are discussing terms for a cloud infrastructure contract, but there is a stalemate over data protection clauses due to differences between European GDPR and Chinese cybersecurity regulations. Timothy stood completely still. How did you? Walls aren't soundproof. And I understand Mandarin, Cantonese, and Shanghainese. The delegation alternated between the three during discussions, assuming linguistic privacy. I can translate if you like. The silence that followed was absolute. Timothy looked at Richard, then at Elijah, then at Angela, who looked like she was about to faint. Richard Caldwell had built a billion-dollar empire based on recognizing extraordinary talent. And he was looking at the most extraordinary talent he had ever encountered, hidden in the son of a cleaning lady whom the system had decided was disposable. If you're enjoying this story about how assumptions can cause us to miss extraordinary things hidden in the most unlikely places, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a 13-year-old boy whom the world completely underestimated is about to turn everything upside down. Timothy Walsh was not a man easily impressed. 30 years in corporate technology had taught him skepticism as a survival tool. But now he was looking at an autistic boy who had just summarized with surgical precision a confidential negotiation that had been stalled for 3 days. That's impossible, Timothy said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. These discussions are confidential. You couldn't. The lead representative, Mr. Chun, is concerned that transferring Chinese user data to American servers violates Article 37 of China's cybersecurity law, Elijah continued, his tone remaining characteristically monotone. But the real impasse isn't legal. It's political. He needs Beijing's approval but doesn't want to appear weak in negotiations. So he keeps citing technical regulations when the real issue is saving face. Richard felt adrenaline rush through his veins. 3 days. 3 days of negotiations going around in circles, expensive translators, legal advisors billing thousands per hour. And a 13-year-old boy had just identified the emotional core of the problem that all the well-paid adults in the room had missed. How do you know that? Richard asked. Body language is difficult for me in direct conversations, Elijah explained. But watching through glass, I can focus only on patterns. Mr. Chen touches his neck when he mentions Beijing. Indicator of stress related to higher authority. He uses a louder voice when talking about regulations, but a lower voice when talking about commercial terms. Performing strength on issues that don't really matter to compensate for perceived weakness on issues that do matter. Timothy was staring at the boy as if an alien had appeared in the hallway. You studied negotiation? No. I studied languages. Negotiation is just conversation with conflicting goals. Languages are logical systems. When people use languages illogically, it means emotion is interfering. Emotion follows predictable patterns. Angela finally found her voice, though it came out shaky. Gentlemen, please. Elijah didn't mean to eavesdrop. He processes information differently. He doesn't understand privacy the same way. I'll make sure. Ms. Williams, Richard interrupted her, his mind already processing possibilities. Does your son attend a special school? Regular public school, Angela replied, confusion mixed with fear in her voice. With a support aide 3 days a week. That's all the district can provide. I tried specialized programs, but, she paused, biting her lip. They cost $40,000 a year. My salary is $28,000. Richard did a quick mental calculation. Angela worked night shifts cleaning offices for a salary he spent on a single weekend in Aspen. And yet she was raising a son who could solve $1 million negotiation problem in minutes. Timothy, Richard said suddenly, the decision made before he even fully understood its implications. Bring the Chinese delegation to the smaller room. Tell them I have a new proposal. Richard, we can't. Now, Timothy. Timothy looked between Richard and Elijah, clearly thinking his CEO had gone mad, but he obeyed. Years of working together had taught him when to argue and when to simply execute. Richard crouched down to Elijah's eye level, though the boy continued to avoid eye contact. Elijah, may I ask you a question? You just asked one. Richard almost smiled. May I ask another question? Yes. If you were negotiating with Mr. Chun, how would you resolve the impasse? Elijah swayed slightly, processing. I would give him a public victory on an issue that doesn't matter to allow for a private concession on an issue that does matter. Humans need narratives where they don't lose. Especially in collectivist cultures where individual loss is group loss. Can you elaborate? Publicly agree to implement a proxy server in Hong Kong for Chinese data. Hong Kong is technically China but has enough legal autonomy to satisfy both sides. Mr. Chun can report to Beijing that data remains on Chinese territory. You guys maintain actual technical access through controlled infrastructure. Everyone wins. No one loses. Clean narrative. The silence that followed was broken by Angela. Elijah, baby, you can't just. That's brilliant, Richard said, standing up. His heart was racing in a way it hadn't in years. Not since the early days of building TechCorp, when every decision was a bet against impossibility. Ms. Williams, may I ask an extraordinary favor? Angela looked like she was about to vomit with anxiety. Sir. May I ask that your son participate in the meeting? As a consultant. He's 13, Angela whispered, tears returning. And he's autistic. He can't. People scare him. Large groups overwhelm him. He has meltdowns if. I don't like people looking at me, Elijah stated matter-of-factly. But I can sit with my back to the table. Or in an adjacent room with a microphone. Or write suggestions that Mr. Caldwell can read. There are multiple possible configurations that accommodate my sensory needs while providing consultative value. Richard looked at the boy with growing admiration. 30 years of leading executives, and this child had just articulated a solution to an accommodation problem more clearly than most neurotypical adults could. Adjacent room, Richard decided. With a microphone. You listen, write down observations, I implement. Does that work? Elijah considered it for exactly 3 seconds. It works. But I need noise-canceling headphones. And the fluorescent lights need to be turned off. They flicker at a frequency that distracts me even if other people don't notice it. Done. Richard turned to Angela. With your permission, of course. Angela was crying openly now, but not out of fear. Something more complex, hope mixed with terror that hope would be destroyed. I don't understand what's going on. Neither do I, Richard admitted honestly. But I just witnessed your son do in 5 minutes what a team of 12 people couldn't do in 3 days. And if there's one thing I've learned building this company, it's to recognize extraordinary talent when I see it. Even when, especially when, it comes in a form I didn't expect. That's when Jennifer Harrison, the HR director, appeared in the hallway carrying a tablet and a stern expression. Mr. Caldwell, I've received a report that there is an unauthorized child on the executive floors. Security protocol requires. The child stays, Richard said with a finality that brooked no argument. Jennifer looked at Elijah, then at Angela in her cleaning uniform, and her expression visibly soured. Sir, we have policies. Cleaning staff are not allowed to bring family members into. Jennifer, Richard interrupted, his voice taking on a sharp edge he rarely used. How many people in this company speak 10 languages fluently? That's not relevant. Answer the question. Jennifer checked her tablet, clearly flustered by the change in direction. Our linguistics department has 17 multilingual employees. Maximum of 6 languages per individual. And how many of them can identify a complex cultural negotiation impasse by listening through a door for 20 minutes? Sir, I don't. None, Richard answered for her. Because we spent 3 days stuck in the same circular argument. This kid identified the real problem and a viable solution in 5 minutes. So either he stays and helps me close an $80 million deal, or you can explain to the board why HR policy was more important than the company's success. Jennifer opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Finally, she nodded stiffly and left, typing furiously on her tablet. Angela was shaking. Mr. Caldwell, I don't want any trouble. I could lose this job. It's all I have. You're not going to lose anything, Richard assured her. And if anyone tries, they'll have to get past me first. He paused, realizing the absurdity of the situation. Ms. Williams, may I ask you something personal? Yes, sir. How do you do it? Working night shifts, raising a child on your own, paying for therapy that insurance doesn't cover. Where does that strength come from? Angela looked at Elijah, who was now taking notes in a small notebook he apparently always carried with him. Because he's worth it. The system looks at him and sees a problem. A diagnosis. Expense. I look and see a miracle who needs someone to believe in him when the whole world says he doesn't matter. The words hit Richard with unexpected force. 30 years building an empire, surrounding himself with people who saw only numbers, efficiency, ROI. And this woman who earned less than his driver had just articulated something he had lost somewhere along the way. Purpose beyond profit. 20 minutes, Timothy returned, looking shaken. The Chinese delegation has agreed to a meeting. But Richard, they're suspicious. They think it's a tactic. If this blows up. It won't blow up, Richard said with a conviction he didn't fully feel. Trust me. He looked at Elijah. Ready. The boy nodded, already heading for the adjacent room Timothy had prepared. Angela followed, still in shock, still carrying the cleaning bucket as if it were an anchor to reality that made sense. What none of them knew, what Richard would discover only in the next few hours, was that Jennifer Harrison was already sending urgent emails to board members about an irregular situation involving the CEO and the son of a cleaning lady. That she had photographed Elijah and Angela with the intention of using it as evidence of Richard's compromised judgment. And that this small decision of bureaucratic cruelty was about to unleash a battle that would reveal just how corrupt TechCorp's corporate structure really was. The smaller meeting room had windows overlooking Seattle lit up at night. Mr. Chen and his 4-person delegation sat on one side of the mahogany table, their carefully neutral expressions masking obvious distrust. Richard sat on the other side, with Timothy and 2 corporate lawyers. In the adjacent room, separated only by a frosted glass wall and a discreet 2-way microphone, Elijah sat with noise-canceling headphones and an open notebook, Angelo at his side still processing the surreal nature of the situation. Mr. Caldwell, Chen began in formal English, we appreciate your willingness to resume discussions. However, our position remains clear. Protection of Chinese citizens' data is. Richard raised his hand gently, looking at the small monitor on his tablet where Elijah was typing rapidly. Words appeared on the screen. He is performing formality. Wait 3-second sentences. Then he will reveal true concern. Richard nodded almost imperceptibly, letting Chen continue. Non-negotiable under the cybersecurity law. We cannot compromise China's digital sovereignty for commercial convenience. He said, we, but glanced briefly at his tablet with communication from Beijing, appeared on Richard's monitor. External pressure confirmed. He doesn't want this position but needs to maintain it. Richard took a deep breath. Mr. Chen, may I make an observation? Please. I've spent 3 days focusing on how our systems differ. But perhaps we should focus on how our goals are the same. You want to protect Chinese citizens' data. I want to provide the most secure cloud services on the market. These things are not opposed. Chen tilted his head slightly, genuine interest appearing in his eyes for the first time in 3 days. Continue. What if we propose a proxy server in Hong Kong? Richard said, feeling his way through Elijah's suggestion. Technically Chinese territory, but with legal frameworks that satisfy both regulatory requirements. Absolute silence. Members of the Chinese delegation exchanged glances. One of them whispered something quickly in Shanghai dialect that no one on the American side should understand. He said that could work, appeared on Richard's monitor. Another replied, but Chen needs to look like he won a concession, not that he accepted a compromise. Offer a symbolic addition that he can take back to Beijing as a victory. Richard improvised quickly. Of course, we would also implement quarterly third-party Chinese audits to ensure ongoing compliance. Your choice of auditing firm. Chen's eyes lit up. Chinese audit? With the authority to suspend access if violations are detected. Absolutely, Richard agreed, knowing that the additional audit costs would be insignificant compared to the $80 million contract. He'll accept, appeared on the monitor. But he'll ask for one more thing to show he didn't give in easily. Small. Symbolic. Give it to him. Are there any other terms that would make the deal more acceptable to Beijing? Richard asked directly, reversing the power dynamic by openly acknowledging Chen's political limitations. Chen paused, clearly surprised by the frankness. Then he smiled, his first genuine expression in 3 days. Perhaps, hiring preference for Chinese engineers on the Hong Kong technical team. Nothing mandatory. Just cultural preference. Done, Richard said immediately. We'll draft an addendum tonight. Signing tomorrow. Chen extended his hand. Signing tomorrow. When the Chinese delegation left 20 minutes later, Timothy leaned against the wall, looking like he had aged 5 years. Richard, what the hell just happened? We just closed the biggest deal of the quarter. I know. But how? We were stuck for days, and suddenly, Timothy paused, glancing at the adjacent room where Elijah was still meticulously taking notes. It was the kid, wasn't it? Richard nodded slowly. Every suggestion. Every bit of timing. He mapped out the entire conversation like it was a mathematical equation. Timothy rubbed his face. Jennifer is going to have a fit. She's already emailed half the board about you, using an unauthorized child in confidential negotiations. Let her try, Richard said, but he felt the familiar weight of corporate politics. We have results. $80 million. The board will swallow any complaints when they see the numbers. In the adjacent room, Angela was holding Elijah's hands, one of the few forms of physical touch he tolerated. Baby, you were amazing. I didn't know. I've never seen you do anything like that. Because no one ever asked me to, Elijah replied simply. Teachers at school say I need to focus on basic social skills before advanced academic ones. But social skills are hard. Languages are easy. Patterns are easy. Why do they make me practice hard things when I'm good at easy things? Angela felt tears burning again. Years of meetings with teachers, therapists, specialists, all focusing on Elijah's deficits, no one asking about his strengths. And in one night, a billionaire CEO had seen what the entire educational system had missed. Richard entered the room. Elijah, may I make you an offer? Yes. I'd like to hire you as a language consultant. Part-time. Mostly remote work, occasionally in person when we need you. $60 an hour. Flexible hours around school. Angela choked up. $60 an hour was more than she made in a whole day cleaning offices. Do I have to pay taxes? Elijah asked. Yes. And will there be a written contract specifying expectations, hours, and termination procedures? Yes. I accept. Formal structures reduce anxiety about ambiguity. Richard held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Elijah shook it briefly, physical contact clearly uncomfortable but tolerated. Welcome to Tech Corp, Elijah. That was when Jennifer Harrison entered without knocking, 3 security guards behind her. Mr. Caldwell, I need to speak with you immediately. In private. Whatever you need to say, you can say here. Jennifer looked at Angela with barely concealed disdain. Very well. I have received multiple complaints about an irregular situation involving a cleaning employee and her minor child in restricted areas. I have also been informed that the child participated in confidential negotiations without background checks, confidentiality agreements, or proper authorization. The child has a name, Richard said coldly. And she just helped us close an $80 million deal. That's irrelevant. Protocols exist for a reason. Ms. Williams, she turned to Angela, you are being placed on administrative leave while we investigate policy violations. Effective immediately. Angela paled. Administrative leave was corporate speak for suspension. Suspension meant no pay. No pay meant no rent, no food, no therapy for Elijah. Under what authority? Richard demanded. Employee Handbook, Section 4.3. Employees may not bring unauthorized family members onto corporate premises. Violation results in suspension pending review. Ms. Williams had my authorization. Given retroactively after violation. Doesn't count. Jennifer smiled coldly. Furthermore, there is the issue of potential exploitation of a minor. You asked a 13-year-old to participate in a commercial negotiation without compensation or legal protections. I hired him. $60 an hour. Contract being drafted now. Jennifer blinked. You can't hire a minor without background check, child labor, parental consent. I know. I'm already on it. But I note that you went from concern for the minor's welfare to defense of cleanliness policy very quickly. Almost as if it weren't really about protecting Elijah. This is about maintaining professional standards, Jennifer retorted. And about the CEO making erratic decisions based on. She glanced at Elijah and Angela, and the venom in her eyes revealed what she really thought. Finish your sentence, Richard said calmly. Based on what, Jennifer? She had enough sense to back down. Based on inappropriate sympathy rather than business judgment. $80 million. It's my business judgment. Bring this to the board tomorrow morning. Along with a recording of the negotiation showing exactly how Elijah contributed. Then we'll see who's exercising inappropriate judgment. Jennifer left, but not before looking at Angela in a way that promised retaliation. When the door closed, Angela collapsed into a chair. Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you can't fight the whole system. Jennifer has friends on the board. She'll make my life impossible. Let her try, Richard repeated, but this time he felt the first pang of real doubt. Jennifer wasn't acting alone. The email to the board meant that allies were already lining up. And Richard knew corporate politics well enough to know that morality rarely won when confronted with consolidated power. But looking at Elijah, a brilliant boy whom the system had decided was expendable, Richard made a decision that would change everything. Ms. Williams, I have a proposal. Not as your boss, but as someone who sees what you're fighting against. He paused. Help me expose exactly how broken our system is. Not just at Tech Corp. The entire system that decides children like Elijah aren't worth investing in. What do you mean? You said specialized programs cost $40,000 a year. Insurance doesn't cover essential therapies. The school district only provides 3 days of support. How many other families are in the same situation? Angela laughed bitterly. Hundreds in Seattle alone. Thousands nationwide. Autism is too expensive for the system to deal with properly. Then let's deal with it. TechCorp is launching a pilot program. Full scholarships for therapies, specialized education, family support. Starting with 10 families. We prove the model works. Then we scale up. That would cost millions. I spend more on marketing campaigns that no one remembers 3 months later. This would be an investment in real human potential. Richard paused. But I need your help. I need you to tell your story. Show the board, the media, the world exactly what families like yours face. It will be difficult. Invasive. Jennifer and people like her will attack. But it could change everything. Angela looked at Elijah, who was writing something in his notebook, oblivious to the conversation that would determine his future. And for the first time in 13 years of fighting alone against a system that didn't care, Angela Williams was not alone. What do you need me to do? The emergency board meeting was called for 8 a.m. the next morning. Richard arrived early, carrying a laptop with a complete recording of the Chinese negotiations and a folder containing a pilot program proposal he had spent the entire night developing. Angela was waiting in the executive reception area, wearing not her cleaning uniform, but a simple outfit that was clearly her best, probably reserved for job interviews or Elijah's school meetings. Her hands trembled as she held her purse. "Are you still sure?" Richard asked. "No," Angela replied honestly. "But Elijah said something to me this morning. He said, 'Mom, if I wait until I'm ready for people to look at me, I'll never do anything. Sometimes doing important things means being uncomfortable. If my 13-year-old son can be brave, so can I.'" Elijah was at home with a neighbor. Boardrooms would be too sensory overload for him. But his presence hung over everything that was about to happen. The boardroom was all dark mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows. 12 members sat around the table, tech veterans, investors, former CEOs. Jennifer Harrison sat in an auxiliary chair, tablet in hand, an expression of barely contained satisfaction on her face. "Good morning," Richard began. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know your schedules are." "Richard, let's get straight to the point," Margaret Chen interrupted. She was the longest-serving member of the board, with 68 years of brutal experience in venture capital. "Jennifer sent us a troubling email last night. Allegations of compromised judgment, protocol violations, inappropriate use of minors in business negotiations. These are serious accusations." "They are," Richard agreed. "And completely unfounded. But before addressing Jennifer's accusations, I'd like to introduce Angela Williams." Angela stood, her legs visibly shaking. Richard motioned to the chair next to him, and she sat down, looking tiny surrounded by corporate power. "Ms. Williams has worked for TechCorp for 6 years, Richard continued. Night shift cleaning. Annual salary, $28,000. Single mother of a son with autism. Last night, her 13-year-old son helped us close an $80 million deal with the Chinese delegation." Murmurs rippled around the table. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Richard played the recording. 20 minutes of negotiation, with key moments highlighted. Every suggestion Elijah made, every linguistic observation, every cultural insight that broke the deadlock. When it ended, there was absolute silence. "That's extraordinary," David Park finally said. He was Senior VP of Global Operations. "How does a 13-year-old boy have this level of cultural sophistication?" "Hyperlexia, a natural talent for languages, and 10 years of watching educational videos because the school system decided he was too different to invest in his strengths," Richard replied. "Ms. Williams, can you tell the board about Elijah's education?" Angela cleared her throat, her voice trembling at first but gaining strength. "Elijah was diagnosed at age 3. Moderate to severe autism," they said. "The school district put him in a special education classroom focused on life skills, basically warehousing him because they didn't know what to do with him. No real academic challenge. No recognition that he was reading at a college level by age 7. She took a deep breath. "I tried specialized programs. Places that understand that autism doesn't mean disability. But they cost $40,000 a year. My insurance classifies autism as a pre-existing condition and refuses to cover therapies. Medicaid has a 3-year waiting list. So I work double shifts cleaning offices to pay for behavioral therapy that allows Elijah to function in a world that wasn't built for him. With all due respect, Jennifer interjected, that's a moving story, but it doesn't change the fact that protocols were violated. Unauthorized child in restricted areas, participation in confidential negotiations without proper checks. Jennifer, Richard cut her off, are you concerned about Elijah's well-being? Or the fact that a black cleaning lady and her autistic son exposed a fundamental flaw in how we operate? That's completely. Let me ask the board something, Richard continued, ignoring her. How many of you know how many families among our 3,000 employees have children with special needs? Silence. I didn't know either. So I had HR compile the data last night. He handed out copies. 127 families. 127 children with autism, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, other conditions that require significant support. Do you know how much our insurance plan covers for essential therapies? Richard, insurance costs are determined by actuaries based on, Margaret began. Zero, Richard interrupted. Zero coverage for behavioral therapies, specialized speech therapy, occupational therapy beyond 6 sessions per year. Families spend an average of $35,000 annually out of pocket. For employees earning $40,000 to $60,000, that's catastrophic. He let the numbers sink in. And yet, when one of these children demonstrates extraordinary talent that literally generates millions for this company, HR's reaction is to punish the mother for protocol violation. Mr. Caldwell, Jennifer was standing now, her face red, you are deliberately distorting. Here's the email you sent yesterday, Richard said, projecting it onto the screen. Irregular situation involving CEO and cleaning lady's son. Not language consultant. Not emerging talent. Cleaning lady's son. As if Elijah's value were determined by his mother's job. Jennifer paled. And here, Richard clicked to the next slide, is the photo you took of Angela and Elijah. Sent to 3 board members with the subject line, Evidence of compromised judgment. Did you obtain consent to photograph a minor? No. Did you violate TechCorp's privacy policies? Yes. But you were so focused on maintaining professional standards that you didn't notice your own hypocrisy. That's when the first twist happened. I have something to add, David Park said, his voice tense with restrained emotion. My daughter has autism. 7 years old. Nonverbal. I never mentioned it at work because I was afraid. Afraid of being seen as less committed. Less focused. Afraid that people would look at me differently. He looked at Angela. But you just stood here and told your story in front of the entire board. And I realized that I'm ashamed of the wrong things. I should be ashamed of hiding my daughter. Of allowing corporate culture to make me feel that she was a weakness rather than a strength that makes me work harder, think more deeply, value every small bit of progress. Tears were streaming down Angela's face now. I vote yes on any program Richard proposes, David continued. And I vote for a full investigation of HR practices that make employees hide their families for fear of retaliation. Margaret Chun was leafing through the data Richard had distributed. 127 families. $35,000 on average. That's $4.4 million annually in unreimbursed costs our employees bear alone. She looked up. We made $340 million last quarter. And we can't cover $4.4 million in essential therapies. Insurance costs are based on, the CFO began. On math that decides some lives are worth less than others, Richard finished. Just like a pharmaceutical company decides that 400 patients with a rare disease aren't worth a $45 million investment. It's always the same equation. Always the same people who are disposable. That's when the second twist happened, the one no one expected. Angela stood up, her voice no longer trembling but firm with finally released anger. You want to know the cruelest part? Elijah is brilliant. Extraordinary. And last night was the first time in 13 years that someone other than me saw that. 13 years of teachers saying he'll never learn, therapists focusing only on his deficits, strangers looking at him as if he were broken. She turned to Jennifer. You took pictures of him as if he were evidence of a crime. As if his presence contaminated your clean corporate hallways. But do you know what Elijah said to me this morning? He said, "Mom, Mr. Caldwell asked me to do something I'm good at. It made me feel useful. Why doesn't anyone else ever ask me to do things I'm good at?" Her voice broke. "My 13-year-old son shouldn't have to ask why the world wastes his gifts. But that's the reality for thousands of kids like him. Not because they can't contribute, but because the system has decided they're too inconvenient, too expensive, too different to be worth trying." Absolute silence in the room. "So here's what I'm going to do," Angela continued, strength surging from a place she didn't even know existed. "I'm going to accept any program Mr. Caldwell creates. And I'm going to tell my story, to the media, to other families, to anyone who will listen. Because if a billionaire CEO can see value in Elijah after 5 minutes, the entire system can learn to do the same." Margaret Chen stood up. "Motion to approve pilot program. $5 million in initial funding. 10 families. Full coverage for therapies, specialized education, family support. Expand if results demonstrate effectiveness." "Second," David Park said immediately. "All in favor?" Margaret called. 11 hands went up. Only Jennifer remained motionless. "Motion approved," Margaret declared. Then she turned to Jennifer. "As for you, HR investigation begins today. Suspension pending results. If we find a pattern of retaliation against employees with family disabilities, you will face termination and possible legal action." Jennifer was white as a sheet. "You can't." "I can and I will," Margaret said coldly. "Because unlike you, I understand that a company built on discarding people for inconvenience is not a company that survives in the long term. It's a company that deserves to go bankrupt." When the meeting ended, Richard found Angela outside, crying with relief and disbelief. "You did it," he said. "Not me. You stood in front of the entire board and forced them to see what they were ignoring." "I'm terrified," Angela admitted. "What if this doesn't work? What if it's just public relations that disappears in 6 months? Then we'll fight again." "But Angela, you just changed the lives of 127 families. Today. And when the story comes out, it will inspire change far beyond TechCorp." That night, Richard called Elijah. "Got a minute?" 60 seconds is an arbitrary unit of measurement, but yes, I am conversational availability, Elijah replied. Richard smiled. "I want to thank you. For yesterday. For being brave even when it was uncomfortable. I didn't do anything special. I just used the skills I have." "Exactly," Richard said softly. "You were yourself. And that was more than enough. In fact, it was extraordinary. And I'm going to spend the rest of my career making sure that other kids like you never have to ask why the world doesn't ask them to do the things they're good at." Pause. Then, "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. That's good to hear." And as Richard hung up, as Angela hugged Elijah in the apartment that was now too small for them and that they could finally leave behind, as Jennifer Harrison cleaned her desk under the gaze of former colleagues who finally saw her for who she was, one thing became absolutely clear. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or politics. It comes from a CEO who had the humility to listen to a 13-year-old boy. From a mother who had the courage to speak truth to power. And from a brilliant child who proved that different doesn't mean less. He proved that it means so much more. 2 years later, Elijah Williams, now 15, adjusted his noise-canceling headphones as he entered the TechCorp auditorium. 500 people filled the space. Families, employees, journalists, representatives of technology companies from across the country. He still didn't like crowds. He probably never would. But he had learned that discomfort did not mean impossibility. Angela was in the front row, no longer wearing a cleaning uniform but a professional blazer. She now ran TechCorp's Family Inclusion Program, a position created specifically for her, paying $85,000 a year. Over the past 2 years, the program had expanded from 10 families to 340, not only at TechCorp but at 17 other companies that had adopted the model. Richard Caldwell took the podium. At 52, his hair grayer but his eyes brighter than 2 years ago, he carried the energy of a man who had rediscovered his purpose. 2 years ago, he began, a 13-year-old boy sat in the hallway of our office and said he spoke 10 languages. I laughed. I assumed it was impossible based on nothing more than appearances, the son of a cleaning lady, a child with autism, a family that didn't belong here. He paused. That laugh was the most productive shame of my life. Because Elijah didn't just speak 10 languages. He taught us a much more important language, the language of recognizing potential, where the system taught us to see only limitations. Applause erupted. Elijah looked at his hands, processing the sound but not making eye contact with the crowd. Today, a program that started with 10 families has impacted hundreds. Full coverage for therapies. Specialized education. Family support. And you know what we discovered? When we invest in people the system has discarded, the return is not only human, it's economic. Richard clicked to a slide showing data. Employees with adequate family support, 43% more productive. Retention increased by 67%. Innovation, measured by patents filed, rose by 28%. Because people no longer burdened by catastrophic medical costs can focus on doing their best work. David Park joined him on stage, holding the hand of his 9-year-old daughter, who now spoke in complete sentences after years of intensive therapy covered by the program. My daughter Sophia was nonverbal. That was the label the system used to decide how much to invest in her. Today she not only speaks, she sings, laughs, tells me about her days. And I'm no longer hiding her for fear that it will harm my career. Tears ran down faces in the audience. Jennifer Harrison faces federal charges of discrimination, Richard announced, his voice hardening. The investigation revealed a 6-year pattern of retaliation against employees with family disabilities. 23 documented cases. She was fired, fined, and barred from corporate HR positions. Because actions have consequences. Applause grew louder now. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about transformation. Richard motioned to Elijah. Come here, buddy. Elijah walked stiffly to the podium. Richard gently positioned the microphone at his level. Elijah is now 15, Richard said. Still consulting with us, $120 an hour now, with performance-based raises. He helped close $340 million in international contracts. Trained our language team. And just been accepted into an early college program at MIT for computational linguistics. Standing ovation. Elijah covered one ear with his free hand. Too much noise, but a small smile touched his lips. I want to say something, Elijah said, his voice still monotone but firm. The room fell silent. 2 years ago, teachers said I needed to focus on eye contact and casual conversation before learning advanced things. But eye contact causes me physical pain. Small talk makes no logical sense to me. So I stopped doing both and focused on learning languages. He paused, processing. The system says autism is a deficit. Something broken that needs to be fixed. But my brain isn't broken. It just works differently. And different doesn't mean less. It means I need different ways to contribute. His voice gained unexpected intensity. There are thousands of children like me. Brilliant in ways the system doesn't measure. And they're being wasted because adults have decided that normal is more important than capable. Mr. Caldwell didn't try to fix me. He asked me to do something I'm good at. It was so simple. And it changed everything. Tears streamed down Angela's face. Richard wiped his own eyes. 6 months later, Angela received an email from a mother in Ohio. I saw your story. My son has autism and an incredible talent for math. A local company just created a program based on your model. He starts next week. Thank you for showing that our children matter. It was one of hundreds. The movement had spread, 23 states, 47 companies, thousands of families. Jennifer Harrison lived in a modest apartment in the suburbs of Seattle, working as a freelance consultant for small startups that didn't know her story. She had lost everything: her career, her reputation, her network. Her LinkedIn had 4 connections. But unlike villains who never learn, Jennifer was doing something surprising. She volunteered on Saturdays at an autism resource center, helping families navigate insurance systems. Quiet work. No glory. Just an attempt to make up for years of cruelty. Angela ran into her there by chance. It was an awkward, uncomfortable moment. I don't expect forgiveness, Jennifer said calmly. But I'm trying to be less of the person I was. Angela nodded. That's all we can do. On the program's 5th anniversary, Elijah spoke at TEDx. 18 years old now, accepted to MIT on a full scholarship, he stood on the red stage and spoke for 18 minutes about redesigning human value. Society measures the wrong kind of value, he said. It measures conformity instead of contribution, normality instead of ability. And in doing so, it wastes extraordinary potential because it comes in non-standard formats. His speech was viewed 8 million times. It inspired legislation in 4 states requiring companies with more than 500 employees to offer special needs coverage. Richard Caldwell, now retired from TechCorp but leading a non-profit foundation dedicated to neurodiversity inclusion, watched the video with tears of pride. "You changed everything," Angela said, sitting in the foundation's office where she now worked as director of family outreach. "No," Richard corrected. "Elijah changed everything. I just had the sense to listen. And you had the courage to tell the truth when it would have been easier to remain silent." Angela looked out the window at the brightly lit city of Seattle. "Sometimes I still can't believe it. 6 years ago, I was cleaning these offices at 3 in the morning, praying that no one would notice Elijah sitting in the waiting room. Now he's going to MIT. And I'm helping hundreds of other families." "Believe it," Richard said. "Because you and Elijah have proven something the world desperately needs to learn. Extraordinary talent doesn't just come from privileged places. It comes from places we never look. From people we dismiss. And when we finally open our eyes, we discover that real wealth isn't in bank accounts. It's in human potential that we almost let die out of ignorance." If this story touched you, if you believe that every person has value regardless of how different they may seem, subscribe to the channel for more stories proving that the best way to change the world is not to fix broken people. It's to break the systems that decide who matters. Because in the end, the CEO didn't save the autistic boy. The autistic boy saved the CEO from a life built on empty values. And together, they proved that when we stop measuring human value by narrow standards, we discover that the world is full of geniuses just waiting for someone to ask, "What are you good at?" The answer can change everything.